On the night of August 18, 1998, a party took place in the small American town of River Hill. A party no one ever wanted to talk about. Police arrived at the house around 2 in the morning after neighbors complained about loud music. But inside, there wasn't a single person. A birthday cake still sat on the kitchen counter. Music played in the living room. Gifts and glasses lay scattered across the floor, and on the wall hung a note. "Thanks for coming. The last guest is already home." The problem was that the owner of the house lived alone, and that night, he disappeared too. The house stood on Willow Street, on the outskirts of River Hill. It had been bought by 29-year-old Michael Reed, an ordinary guy who worked at the local electronics store. Michael wasn't well known around town. He never threw loud parties and barely spoke to anyone, so the invitations to a party came as a surprise even to his neighbors. The cards simply read, "Saturday, midnight, Reed's house. Come alone." Below that was only the letter M. Most of the guests assumed the invitation had come from Michael himself. Later it turned out he hadn't sent anything to anyone. According to the guests' own accounts, the party started around 10 in the evening. About 15 people showed up. Someone brought drinks, someone brought music, and one of the guests gave Michael an old video camera. The recording shows that the first few hours were completely normal. People talked, laughed, danced. Then, at exactly 11:47, the music suddenly stopped. Everyone turned toward the staircase at the same time. On the tape you can hear one of the girls say, "Who invited the rest of them?" For a few seconds, no one answers. Then Michael says, "I thought one of you did." After that line, the recording cuts out. At 2:13 a.m., a neighbor called the police. She said the music in the house had suddenly stopped, and then every window went dark at once. Officers walked in through an unlocked front door. There was not a single guest inside. But the disappearance looked wrong. Coats still hung on the hooks. 15 pairs of shoes stood in the hallway. Phones, wallets, and keys lay on the table. Not a single car had left the driveway, and the back door was locked from the inside. Michael Reed and his 15 guests were never found. 3 days later, the police received their first lead. One of the party guests, Laura Bennett, walked into the station and said she remembered nothing. She claimed she had woken up that morning in her own bed. She was still wearing the same dress she had worn to the party, but written across her palm were the words, "I left last." Laura was certain she had left the house around 10:30, before the party even started. Yet Michael's camera showed her standing in the living room at 11:47. What's more, Laura insisted she had never met Michael before. On the tape, though, the two of them talked like they'd known each other for years. The police first assumed it was some kind of accident. Maybe the guests had slipped out through an old underground tunnel and agreed to keep quiet. That theory fell apart quickly. There was a small basement under the house. Inside they found only old furniture and boxes left by previous owners. One of the boxes was dated 1964. Inside were photographs. The first picture showed a party in the exact same house. The same living room, the same staircase. People in 1960s clothes sat around the table. On the back of the photo was written, "Party in honor of Edward's return." City records showed that a family had lived in a house in 1964. The owner was Edward Miller. Officially, he left town after his wife disappeared. Neighbors told a different story. They said Edward had thrown a big party to celebrate her return, but his wife never showed up. Instead, people no one had ever seen before appeared in the house. The next day the guests were gone. Edward stayed behind alone. A week later, he vanished too. A newspaper article from the time mentioned that police found strange words written on the wall. The party continues as long as someone remembers the invitation. The researcher who later studied Michael Reed's case compared the photographs from 1964 and 1998. The people in the pictures were different, but one woman appeared in both. She stood in the far corner of the room, staring straight at the camera. In 1964 she looked about 20. In 1998 she looked exactly the same. She never appeared on the party video, but her voice can be heard at the very end of the tape. She says, "You're late." After that, the camera falls to the floor. It keeps rolling for almost 4 more minutes. In the reflection of a mirror, you can see the guests leave the room one by one. The living room door stays closed the entire time. A few years after Michael disappeared, his sister gave the police a box of his personal belongings. Inside they found a notebook. The first pages were about the house. Michael wrote that even before he bought it, he had several times seen lights in the windows, even though the building was empty. Then the invitations started arriving. First one, then 2, each with a new date. The last entry was written the day before the party. Today I realized I'm not the one writing the invitations, so why is it my handwriting? On the next page were only a few words. If they come, don't call them by name. The strangest detail turned up in the guest list. Police put it together from the belongings they found and from the video footage. There were 15 people, but the list had 16 names. The last one was John Reed. That was Michael's father. He had died 9 years before the party. At first they thought it was a mistake, but near the end of the tape, someone says, "Dad, you came after all." It's Michael's voice. Right after those words, the lights in the house go out. When they come back on, Michael is gone from the frame. Laura Bennett was the only guest who went on living a normal life. A year after the party, she went back to the house. By then the building stood empty. Laura walked inside, climbed to the second floor, and found a room that hadn't been there before. A small plaque hung on the door for the last guest. Inside was a long table. 15 plates and 11 candles sat on it. Laura said she recognized every person seated at that table. They were the guests from the party. Michael was among them. He looked calm. He was smiling. Laura asked him where they had been all this time. Michael answered, "We were waiting for you to remember that you received an invitation too." Laura looked at the table. A 16th plate sat in front of her. Beside it lay a card. Her name was written on it. Laura ran out of the house and never went back. A few months later the building was torn down. Workers claimed that just before the demolition they found an old windowless room inside. Photographs of different parties hung on the walls. 1964, 1965, 1966. But the last photograph had been taken after the house was already gone. Laura stood in it. Beside her were all the missing guests, and in the center of the picture was Michael. On the back of the photo was the date, August 18, 1999. Exactly 1 year after that night, officially, the story of the Willow Street party is considered an urban legend. No solid proof of the house, of Michael Reed, or of his guests has ever been found. But the researcher who studied the old photographs noticed one more detail. In the 1964 picture, among the guests, stood a man who looked remarkably like Michael. And in the 1998 photograph, in the far corner of the room, you can see a man who looks like Edward Miller. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Or maybe some parties don't end when the music stops. They end only when the last guest finally forgets why they came. And if one day you receive an invitation with no return address, don't try to figure out who sent it. First check the guest list. Your name might already be on it.